This is Toumani Camara, and it's time to open up the briefcase with Casey Holdahl.
Greetings, Blazer fans, and welcome to The Briefcase, presented by Spirit Mountain Casino. Episode 138 of The Briefcase, presented by Spirit Mountain Casino. I am Casey Holdahl, and as you can maybe tell, I don't know how well you know the inside of hotels, I am in Salt Lake City with the Portland Trail Blazers as they begin a 7-game, 2-week road trip that just got off to a start. I guess it technically starts on Sunday because we flew to Salt Lake City, had practice today here in Salt Lake City in preparation for the game tomorrow versus the Utah Jazz. Trailblazers starting this road trip after playing 2 games at home after the All-Star break. One, a close loss to the Los Angeles Lakers. The second, the largest margin of victory in franchise history versus the Charlotte Hornets. We'll talk about both those games. We'll talk about Portland's recent record versus the spread and this road trip on this edition of The Briefcase, presented by Spirit Mountain Casino. Well, after the All-Star break and a couple days of practice, the Portland Trail Blazers had their first game after the All-Star break by hosting the Los Angeles Lakers. Fortunately for the Trail Blazers, did not go the way they would like to go. Seemed a bit rusty for the Trail Blazers, facing a Lakers team that had played the night before, that actually lost to the Charlotte Hornets, playing Portland on the second night of a back-to-back. After the All-Star break might be one of the few times when playing on the second night of a back-to-back is actually beneficial, seeing as how you just had a break and you're able to get the rust off in one of those games in order to play the next game. The Lakers looked very good in that game, ended up winning that game 110-102, and settled in front of a sellout crowd, one of the best sellout crowds of the season this year, which is what you get when you have the Lakers come to town, particularly with LeBron. The expectation was that Luka was going to play, but he did not end up playing, but still 19,399 people showed up on Thursday night for that game nonetheless. Fortunately, the Trailblazers didn't necessarily show up in the first half of that game. Lakers led by as many as 18 points in the second quarter, though the Trailblazers were able to cut it to 55-47 going into the intermission. So trailing by, 9 points going into the intermission, 8 points. You felt like you had a pretty good chance. And then Portland carried that momentum into the second half, into the third quarter, with Denny posting 16 points in the third quarter alone, and the Blazers going into the fourth quarter just trailing by 1 point, versus a very good Lakers team that, just yesterday on Saturday went into Denver and ended their win streak, playing with Luka in that game. They were not playing with Luka, obviously, in the game in Portland, as already mentioned. But they did still have LeBron James, and LeBron James, as we all know throughout his career, has always played very well in Portland. I think his highest scoring average versus any team in the NBA is the highest versus Portland, if I'm not mistaken. I always attribute that to all the Nike people being in town, LeBron being able to go out there and kind of show him what he does. And he definitely showed everyone what he did in that game as well. Every time it seemed like the Blazers were going to make a push, LeBron would make a shot. Austin Reeves would get yet another trip to the free throw line. So the Blazers never able to get over the top of that one, even though they were able to. I think they tied the game in the fourth quarter, never able to take the lead in the second quarter, though I think they maybe outscored the Lakers in the second half, but not able to get that win. LeBron goes 4 or 5 from the field and 2 or 2 from 3, 2 or 2 from the line for 12 points in the fourth quarter to cement that one. And as I mentioned, Austin Rivers, 11 points, 2 assists, 2 steals, and 2 blocks in the final 12 minutes of that game to give the game to the Lakers. Danny ends up finishing that game with 28 points. A really nice game for Danny. Again, second half, Danny looked great, going 9 of 14 from the field, 2 of 3 from 3, and 8 of 10 from the free throw line, 5 assists, 4 rebounds, and 2 steals in 33 minutes in that one. Toumani Camara, who has been on a heck of a run, as we'll talk about here in a minute, going 7 of 8 from the field in the loss to the Lakers, 3 of 4 from 3 to finish with 19 points, 7 rebounds, and a career high 5 steals to go with 3 assists in 37 minutes. I think I maybe have mentioned this before on the briefcase. I think, initially the expectations for Toumani were maybe to be like a really good 3-and-D player. It seems to me like he's already showing that he can be more than that. I don't know exactly what level it would be. Like, I don't know if we're talking borderline all-star. I don't know if we're talking, 15-year NBA starter. I don't know what it is, but 3-and-D, which is a very valuable position, a very valuable skill set to have in the NBA, feels like it's maybe selling Toumani a little bit short at this point because he has been playing absolutely fantastic basketball, and it seems like he's just improving every single game. Scoot Henderson, another guy who's had a really good 2025, came off the bench in that game, 12 points, 5 assists, 2 rebounds, 2 steals in 30 minutes. Shaedon Sharpe, still coming off the bench, 11 points. Robert Williams did play in that game, had 8 points, 6 rebounds, 2 steals, and assist in 25 minutes. LeBron James led all scorers with 40 points on 14 of 27 shooting. Austin Reeves had 32 points as well. Robert Williams did play in that game, has not played since. He did not play in the victory versus the Hornets. He's already been listed as out for the game versus the Utah Jazz. So not sure exactly what the nature of that injury is. If it's just soreness, with Rob, like I think anytime it's anything with his knee, I think they're probably gonna put him on the shelf. Already without DeAndre Ayton, Donovan Clingan has been starting in DeAndre Ayton's place, doing a good job. I think it's going to probably, particularly after the All-Star break, I think it's going to probably take him a little bit of time to get back up to speed a little bit. But he's making some progress there. They're getting also really good minutes from Jabari at the backup five as well. So they're making it work. Though against the Utah Jazz, a team that does have quite a bit of size, we'll see how that one is able to go. So the Blazers end up losing that game on Thursday versus the Lakers. Their fourth straight loss at that point in time. And again, just looked like a team that needed to shake the rust off, or that looked like they hadn't played in a week. But then a few nights later on Saturday versus the Hornets, whatever rust might have been there was long gone at that point in time. Trailblazers led by as many as 33 points in the first half, and led by as many as 55 points in the game before coming away with a 141-88 victory in front of a crowd of 18,500 at Moda Center on Saturday night. 53 points, the largest margin of victory ever for your Portland Trailblazers, beating the previous record of 50 points, which I believe they put up versus the Cavs in, I think, 1982 or 83 or something like that. So a long time since Trailblazers have won a game. I mean, they've never won a game by 53 points, but a long time since they've won a game by 50 points. Just absolutely ran the Hornets out of the building on Saturday night. And again, a Hornets team that started their post All-Star break by beating the Lakers in Los Angeles, which, the Lakers might be kind of still figuring some stuff out a bit. But they're still a pretty good team. And the Hornets team, the Blazers bested on Saturday night. I'm not entirely sure how they beat the Lakers, but I guess that's just the NBA. Some nights you got it, some nights you don't. The Blazers had it on Saturday night. The Hornets absolutely did not. And again, unlike in the game versus the Lakers, the Blazers got off to a really good start in that game, which is incredible. It's really important for this team too. I think we've talked about it throughout the season. When they get off to a good start, they typically have a good game. They get off to a poor start, they've done a much better job of getting back into games. But that just puts you in a situation where you're chasing the entire time. I mean, like the Laker game, good example. If they don't trail by 18 points in that game, I guess you can't say they would have won it, but you would have felt a lot better about their chances of winning that game. And if you hadn't had to make up that much of a deficit, if everything else is being equal, you probably have a good chance to come away with that win. But they didn't get off to good starts, so they didn't. But that was obviously not the case on Saturday. They basically did everything well throughout the entire 48 minutes of that game on Saturday night. Blazers scoring 38 points in the first quarter. They took a 17-point lead into the second quarter, and that was their largest first quarter lead this season. Didn't let up. They shot 54% from the field and 46% from three, while holding the Hornets to just 26% from the field and 9% from three. Everything working for the Trailblazers. 33-point lead going into the half, and that was their largest lead at the half this season, which would make sense why they would go on to have their largest margin of victory, not just also of this season, but also in franchise history. Also had 27 fast break points in the first half of that game, which is the most fast break points any team has scored in the NBA this season in any half, which is pretty crazy. Chauncey even talked about it after the game, why that might be. And he was like, when we get out in transition, like a lot of times we have a habit of just kind of like everyone like running in a straight line, like next to each other, not like fanning out to give options to the ball handler. And he said, in the game versus the Hornets, they did a much better job of when they would have fast break opportunities to kind of get out in transition. And again, like get guys spaced so they're able to attack the defense rather than one guy being able to defend two or three guys because they're all kind of standing next to each other. So not only they have the largest margin of victory for any Trailblazer team this year, I don't know what the largest margin of victory for any team in a game this season is. I mean, 53 has got to be pretty close to that. But again, 27 points in the first half via fast break, the most that any team has scored via fast break points in a half this season. And again, for a team like the Trailblazers, it is not a good fast break team, or that has not generally been a good fast break team. That's a really good sign going forward. And again, when things kind of get away from a team too, sometimes it's a little hard. You can't like derive a ton out of the way you perform necessarily in those kind of games because, a lot of times it's, the Hornets didn't have it. But things like fast break points and being able to stack fast break points, that's something that I think you can look to and say like, no, we did that, like, yeah, we turned them over, but like we had to get out in transition. We're the ones that created those opportunities. And that wasn't something that necessarily happened because, the Hornets just didn't have it that night. And it was also in the first half too, where the game wasn't necessarily close, but it was still a game. So, by midway through the third quarter, I think the Blazers had over 100 points with like 3:30 left to play in the third quarter. And I think the Hornets had maybe like 55 points at that point in time. So, by midway through the third quarter, that game was over. I mean, you could claim the game was over at the half, but a lot of times, or not a lot of times, but sometimes teams will come out and have, really great efforts in a second half and able to get themselves back into a game. That was not the case Saturday for the Hornets. The Blazers were not going to allow that to happen anyways. Again, after losing four straight, after coming off of that really nice win streak they were on, I think the Blazers were like, hey, we cannot let this game fall, and they did not let that one fall. So the Blazers basically just do what they need to do in the second half. All those bases decided at that point in time was how much they were going to win by, 53 points. The Blazers, as you would expect, when you score 100 and whatever it was points, 141 points, set their highs this season in, let me see here, how many things they set highs in? Set highs in points, obviously field goal percentage, assists, three-pointers made, and fast break points. So basically, most of the main stat categories on offense, Trailblazers setting their career marks, or excuse me, their season marks in that. Not actually, I don't know if we had any actual career games for the Blazers. And then when you look at Portland's box score, I mean, they scored 141 points, which is a lot of points. But like, there wasn't anyone that had like 50 or 40 or like even I don't even think anyone had 30 actually in that game. So it wasn't like any one player just like went off. It was like everyone just had a really nice night, led by Toumani, who had 20 points on 7 of 9 shooting, 10 rebounds, 6 assists, and a plus minus of 45, plus 45, which according to Tom Haberstroh, the best plus minus in franchise history. And again, Toumani, and I mean, like, what you got from Toumani on offense was great, but his defense on LaMelo Ball was stifling. Like, I mean, LaMelo, I would say, like after the first quarter, was just like, no, I'm not doing this tonight. Toumani was doing a fantastic job, just all over him. Really, really good debut of a good nickname from Lamar Hurd, calling Toumani the Shadow, which is I think that might catch on because that is a good nickname for Toumani. And again, just wrecking havoc on the defensive end and also making progress on the offensive end too, to the point now where it's like he's really rounding himself into a really nice player in his second season. He also became just the first Blazer ever, and just the second player this season to attempt or to post at least 20 points, 10 rebounds, and 6 assists on fewer than 10 field goal attempts. Again, Toumani really making things happen on both sides of the ball for the Trailblazers right now. Really fun to watch him play ball. And again, a guy too where, he's really starting to get the recognition for that as well. Like you see more and more now the name Toumani Camara out there, which, even a month ago, didn't hear about Toumani a whole lot. It takes the NBA a little bit of time to catch up to things, and especially when you're a team like the Blazers, who, probably don't have a whole lot of, not necessarily a ton of interest outside of Portland right now because, where they're at in the standings. But still, the more and more that people see Toumani play, I think obviously the more and more they're coming to respect what he does. I don't want to jinx anything or anything, but at this point in time, to me, like all NBA defense, one of those teams seems like, I won't say a guarantee, but it would be very shocking to me if Toumani continues to play the way he's played this season for the rest of the season. If he doesn't end up on an all NBA team, all defensive team, I should say at least. He's not the all NBA team yet. Don't get it twisted. I'm not trying to go straight hyperbole here, but in terms of all defensive team, I think Toumani's got a really strong case for that. We're going to start making the case for Toumani more. I mean, he's made the case for himself, but I think as an organization, we'll probably start helping it along as well because he definitely deserves that recognition, which you saw on Saturday night. Anthony Simons goes 50% from both the field and from three for 25 points, 4 assists, 3 rebounds, and 26 minutes. Shaedon Sharpe goes 8 of 12 from the field. Shaedon came out and had a really good start to the game as well. Came off the bench, but still really got buckets early on in that game. Kind of set. I feel like his offensive game really kind of set Portland on the path to winning that game by a significant margin. He finished, as I mentioned, with 20 points. 5 assists, 3 rebounds, and 2 blocks in 21 minutes. Jabari Walker, one of his best games of the season as well. 6 of 10 from the field, 7 of 10 from the free throw line. Jabari getting to the free throw line 10 times is great. I mean, the way he plays, the physical nature of the game that Jabari plays, it makes sense for him to get to the free throw line. It's great to see. It's something this team absolutely needs. They don't have a ton of guys who are capable of getting to the line, or at least that do get to the line consistently. So anytime someone does, I'm always like, oh, good for you, man. And they needed those points. And then probably didn't need him versus the Hornets that night, but it's always nice to have him. Really nice get from Jabari as well. As mentioned, 20 points, 14 rebounds. That's his first 20 and 10 game of his career as well. Shout out to you, Jabari. 2 steals, 2 assists. playing backup center for the Trailblazers. I really liked his answer too in the post game about what was working on the glass for the Blazers in that game versus the Hornets. And Jabari kind of thought about it for a minute, and he was like, "Oh, because I was out there, and I feel like I'm pretty good at rebounding. So the fact that I was out there gives us a better chance to get more rebounds." Which I was like, "Yeah, good for you, Jabari. Be confident. You did go out there and do that thing. So shout out to you, Jabari. I love it when players are confident in a helpful context, and I feel like Jabari always is. I mean, I feel like confidence is usually a good thing in the NBA. Sometimes, if you're confident without the game to back it up, that probably can become a negative thing. But when you're playing well and you're feeling it and you feel good about the way you're playing, Toumani is exactly the same way. I asked Toumani as well about kind of his offensive game and why he thinks he's taking kind of that step forward. And he's like, I just feel like it's confidence. He's like, I don't know if I didn't believe in my ability to do some of these things, or if it was kind of the systems I was in, or what I was being asked to do from my coaches, when I was prepping it at both Georgia and Dayton. But either way, like he's like, what's really changed for me is just my confidence in going out and trying some of these things and having success doing them. And even when I don't have success doing those things, knowing that like, hey, I'm just not necessarily going to get pulled because I made a mistake. So having that confidence and enthusiasm in your own skills is really important for NBA players. So I'm glad that both those guys express that because when you're winning, you should be confident. That's a good thing. And when you win by 53 points, you should feel very confident about the way you played in that game. Denny Avdia as well, 15 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists, and a steal in 23 minutes. Scoot goes 4 of 7 from the field, 3 of 5 from three for 13 points, 5 assists, and a rebound in 20 minutes. So the Blazers finish off the little 2-game homestand after the All-Star break with a blowout victory. Blowout doesn't even probably sum it up well enough. Whatever 53 points is, that's an absolute destruction of the Charlotte Hornets. So congratulations to the Blazers. Glad they were able to get that one before heading out on this 7-game road trip. It's always nice to leave after a win. Particularly if they had lost that game to the Hornets. I think, as I mentioned, that would have been their 5th straight loss, and then you're heading out on the road. And some definitely some winnable games out here on the road for the Trailblazers. But you don't want to hit the road, having lost 5 straight. So the fact they're able to have a good performance versus the Lakers, even though they didn't get the win, and then to finish that off by just stomping out the Hornets, puts them on a good path going into this 7-game road trip. And we're going to be out here for a while, so you might as well feel good at the start because on a 2-week trip, when you're playing 7 games, you're going all the way to the East Coast, then halfway back to the West Coast. At some point in time, you're not going to feel very good about things. So it's nice to start off the trip with some positivity and a win. Well, it's always nice to get wins, but particularly for this Blazer team, to get wins, when your young players have really nice games, it makes it even better. It's nice to see your upcoming players really have an opportunity to shine. And when you get wins in those situations, it just really makes you feel like, you're getting some progress done and you're setting things forward for future seasons going forward. It's just always nice to have upcoming guys like Toumani and Scoot and Donovan do well. And if you're someone who loves country music, you should experience some of country music's best and brightest stars at the upcoming country concert at Spirit Mountain Casino on April 19th, featuring John Morgan with Abby Anderson and Brandon Davis. You won't want to miss these up-and-coming country acts. Tickets start at $35 and are on sale now at spiritmountain.com. Spirit Mountain Casino, elevate your game. The Trailblazers held a practice in Utah on Sunday after arriving in Salt Lake City in preparation for Monday's game versus the Jazz. 6 o'clock start time on KATU 2.2, Rip City Radio, Blazer Vision. A lightish practice. A lot of times when the team travels and then goes to a practice, it's really more kind of like a shoot around at the practice, and then they'll just have a team meeting rather than having a shoot around on Monday morning. At least that's my assumption. At least the schedule does change from time to time, but a lot of times they want to get guys off the plane and just kind of get them moving around a little bit. And particularly when you had a great game like you had on Saturday, you're not going to go too hard in the next practice the next day because you feel good about what you're doing and you just want to refine some of the things you've done. So really more just talking about kind of, what they need to do versus the Jazz on Monday night. A Jazz team that went into Portland and, beat them pretty good this season as well. The first game for the Blazers in Salt Lake this season. Last road game of the season is also in Salt Lake. So getting front loaded in terms of games here in Salt Lake City, which is also at elevation a little bit. Always something to remember that it's not Denver, but you are at quite of an elevation here in Salt Lake. Donovan Clingan, who will be starting at center on Monday night, had a really good game versus Nikola Jokic in Denver at elevation. So he's become accustomed to that, or you would hope he's a little accustomed to that. So interesting to see what we get out of him. As I mentioned, no Rob Williams in that game. They're just sitting him with knee soreness as they did in the game versus the Hornets. Not sure what his status is going to be for the rest of the trip, but he joins DeAndre Ayton and Matisse Thybulle on the injured list. Matisse, as I mentioned on the last show, I think it's getting pretty close. I think just watching the way that he's moving around on the court right now, I don't know that he's going to play on this trip, but it would not surprise me if he did play on this trip. He is on the trip, which, in 2 weeks he would probably go on the trip regardless. But still, if, you can't play if you're not on the trip. So it's good to see Matisse out there. And I think it's very possible that he could make his season debut at some point in time on this trip. And if not, maybe sometime very soon after we arrive back in Portland, though we're back for one game, then head right back out for one more game and then go back home. Not that that really matters all that much, but either way, we are going to be traversing around quite a bit here. So as I mentioned, the Blazers starting off this trip with a game versus the Jazz on Monday. Then after that, Wednesday, heading out to DC to play the Wizards on Wednesday. We'll head out to DC on Tuesday in order to play the Wizards on Wednesday. Then the Brooklyn Nets on Friday, February 28th. So 3 games right there are very winnable games for the Trailblazers. And, when people talk to me or they ask me kind of what do I think the team is going to do post All-Star break, I think they're going to play it out, and I think particularly when if they're able to get some of these games on this trip, I think you start to kind of consider, maybe can they get into that play-in spot, which is something the team talked about, or at least I asked them about after the All-Star break. It's getting tighter in the West. I think, some of the teams that made moves at the trade deadline, particularly the team like the Warriors, seem like they're about ready to go on a run. But then you also got a team like the Spurs, who, Wemby's out for the rest of the season. So you don't know exactly how they're going to play that, but you can probably make some assumptions based off of the way that the Spurs have generally operated in those kind of situations. So, some games here that are winnable and a chance to maybe get into that playing conversation. I would say they're just outside that conversation right now. I think they're 5 or 6 games back from the 10th spot, which, when you got, I think, what is it, 25, 24 games to play, making up 5 games that's pretty tough, but definitely within the realm of possibility, particularly if they're able to come out on this trip and get some wins. So then after the game versus the Brooklyn on Friday, February 28th, a couple of days off, then heading to Cleveland to face the Cavaliers and an afternoon game in that one on Sunday. Then playing a Philadelphia team that also seems like they're really struggling. Sounds like Embiid might be done for the season. He's having some knee issues there. A team that I believe is below Portland in these standings, actually. So another very winnable game there. Then you play a Boston team that's playing really good basketball right now on March 5th, and you wrap up the trip versus a very good Oklahoma City Thunder team on March 7th. So really kind of a duality on this trip. You got teams that are basically at the bottom of the standings, and then you got the teams at the very top of the standings. I don't think that, wow, yeah, they're not facing a single team that's kind of like in the middle. Utah, Washington, Brooklyn are, pretty far down there, particularly Utah and Washington. And then Cleveland and as well as Philadelphia. And then you got Cleveland, Boston, and Oklahoma City. All 3 of those teams are potential championship caliber teams this year. So you got kind of both ends of the spectrum there on this trip, which is an interesting way to go about doing it. And when you're going to be out for 2 weeks and 7 games, you might as well have some variance there. So you got the best in the NBA and you got the worst in the NBA on this trip. And finally, since we haven't talked about it in a while in our betting on the Blazers segment, the Trailblazers, after covering in 11 straight games, failed to cover in 4 straight games. All 4 of those games they lost during that 4-game losing streak. Didn't cover in any one of those games. Losing's one thing. Still like to cover in losses, though. That'd be nice. But that did not end up happening. There were 9-point dogs and 8-point dogs in the 2 games versus the Nuggets. They ended up losing both those games by double digits. And they were 2-point dogs versus the Lakers and ended up winning that or losing that game, by 8. So they got close-ish in that one. But finally, they broke that streak. They paid out on Saturday night, as you would expect. They were 6-point favorites versus the Hornets and won that game by 53 points. So they covered 5 or 6 times over. I wonder if you could have placed a bet on the Blazers to win by 50 points in that game. And if you could, I wonder what the payout would be. I don't think DraftKings does that, but I know sometimes you do those alternate spreads. I'm guessing the alternate spread couldn't get to 50, but if it did, I'd be curious what the odds would be on that because doing something you've never done in franchise history generally tends to pay out pretty well in the bets. Um, and in that game versus the Hornets as well, the Blazers were favored in that game, and just the fourth time this season that the Blazers have been favored in a game. And Saturday's game was the first time they've actually covered as a favorite this season. In the three previous games, they failed to cover when they were favorites. And not only did they fail to cover in those three games, but in two of those games, they got blown out. One of those was, as I mentioned, that game versus the Utah Jazz, and then one of them was a game versus the Nets at home as well. Two teams that are playing on this trip. So it was nice to actually be favored and cover in a game this season, which again, that's the first time that this has happened for the Trailblazers this season. Even though the Blazers have done a really nice job of covering as of late, their record on the season is 32 and 24 and 1 versus the spread. Which again, if you've bet consistently on the Trailblazers this year, you have made money because they have generally been a pretty good option. The line not posted yet for the Utah Jazz game, if I'm not mistaken, because I believe the Jazz are playing already. Not entirely sure about that, but either way, I'm curious. Actually, let's see real fast here. Hold on, folks. Let's see if the old folks at DraftKings have posted what the lines are. If you happen to be at Spirit Mountain Casino, you could be checking these things out on your own because you can place any bets you want at Spirit Mountain Casino, sports betting, up to and including college, which you can't do on DraftKings. So let's see here. Do they have that posted? Yes, Trailblazers 2-point favorites versus the Jazz, which is the first time this season that the Trailblazers are favorites on the road. So there you go. 2-point favorites versus the Jazz for the game on Monday, 6 o'clock start time, as I mentioned, on KBTV 2.2, Blazer Vision, 6:20 a.m. And that's going to do it for this edition of The Briefcase. Thank you so much for joining me. As always, I'll be back with more shows throughout the next 2 weeks on this road trip. As I mentioned, Trailblazers host or facing the Jazz, after which they'll host. Why do I keep saying they want to host places? Where I've been saying over and over again that we're on a road trip. They're not hosting anybody here for the next 2 weeks. After Utah, Washington, Brooklyn, Cleveland, Philadelphia, Boston, and on March 7th, wrapping up the trip on Oklahoma City. So plenty of shows in between now and then. Hopefully you'll return. Hopefully you will like and subscribe wherever you get your podcast, be it on YouTube, be it on Apple Music, be it on Spotify, wherever. Please like and subscribe wherever you happen to find this content. Thank you so much for joining me. As always, we will talk soon. I'm Casey Holdahl. Go Blazers.